So hi, everybody. We can't see you all, but we know you're there, and we really appreciate because we know that this is one of the last sessions, and it's also in parallel with some other interesting sessions. But we thank you very much for joining us. We will talk today about innovative governance models. And especially how these can maybe be an inspiration or just some food for thought on how to continue the ULG work on monitoring actually and implementing the resulting integrated action plan that we have all been working on. We are here in an AWE trio, which Chris did a super nice play word when we started this work. The awesome trio, and indeed it was. We wish we had actually a bit more time. So I'm Annamaria Vrabie. I'm joined here by Eileen and Wessel. All three of us are our lead experts for 3 different networks. And before we start, because we see that you are there, we want to encourage you to use the chat. And to tell us, just in a maybe a sentence or just a keyword, what does innovation mean for you? When you hear innovation, what do you think about, or how do you define it? And while you jot some ideas down in the chat, so we can see you and we can see a bit where to start from. What does innovation mean? Maybe I'm going to turn to Eileen to tell us a bit, how do you explain innovation in a very simple way, or how do you use it in your work?
Innovation. Thanks, Annamaria. It can be quite a scary word. And often when we're just normal people, we often feel, it doesn't apply to us because innovation is for these superstars who can just create something like phenomenal that we've never heard of before. But I think for me, we have to remember that innovation, actually, it's quite simple, and we innovate every day in the things that we do. It's simply doing something in a new way. And that might even be borrowing it from somebody else, or stealing an idea that you've seen somewhere else that you haven't done yourself. It doesn't have to be something that's never happened before. It's just a new way of doing things. I don't know if
I think that stealing of the ideas that works for me. I'm probably one of these guys that cringe when I hear the word innovation. I prefer if there's other ways of describing how we try to bring about change. But I see in the chat box there's quite a few people who have, Severine says here, a new way of thinking and doing. That's sweet. That's short and sweet. It says what it is. I prefer to think in that way. But also, Gronya makes the point that it's about method or ways of doing things. So I don't think innovation is a recipe. It's a learning process in itself, and it's probably trying things to see how it can work. Now, the fun part of the 3 of us is we figured out that the one person who does with that every day of their life will be the one that can tell us how to do it. So, Annamaria, how do you do innovation?
Yeah, thanks, Wessel. Indeed, I find that a lot with what is going on in the chat, it's actually signaling change or a new way to do things. But this new way doesn't mean that it's new, that it hasn't been done elsewhere. It's just new to the standard or the present way of doing things. And sometimes what I learned was that people are more scared of the word change than they are of innovation. So innovation somehow now has a sort of nice touch to it, although the cautious part is that it risks having no content anymore because it's just used. So hopefully in our talk, just getting some examples from our very recent experiences for the 3 of us, we will be able to contextualize a bit. So thanks. Yes, raising kids is innovation. Yes, indeed, Chris. before we kick off, I also wanted to ask you, our dear audience, that we can actually spot who you are because of the chat. So keep sending us messages. It's a nice detective game. How would you define governance? Because we have this title of the session is so loaded in concepts, innovative governance models, that we want to see a bit where we can start. What's our bench, and also a bit to kick us out. Wessel, how would you define governance, or how do you use it in your work?
I think the essence of governance is how decisions are made and how other people can participate in decisions, or different groups or stakeholders is the word we like to use, can participate in decision making, and to what extent there's a decision making process which is as participatory as possible, which would be the goal, but often decision making is assigned to a person or to one or two persons, and it's trying to see how that can become a better process, I think is what we refer to when we speak about governance. And there's all kinds of issues that come up. So for instance, just the gender issue, to bring one up, there's typically patterns of decision making, which becomes ingrained patterns of decision making. So when we try to address governance, it's trying to also look at those patterns and see if we can think about it differently. I don't know, Eileen, what you think about governance.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you say. Often when I read it, it takes me a while to think about what is actually being discussed, because it's such an intangible thing. But I think, put very simply, it describes how we interact with stakeholders in order to achieve a common goal. So, what are our different roles and responsibilities as stakeholders? Who are the relevant stakeholders? How do we meet? How often do we meet? How do we make decisions? Who's leading us? What framework are we using in order to achieve a common goal? And I really like to comment, Mary just put in the chat there quite earlier, when we spoke about innovation, she said, learning to do something in a different way from somebody else's point of view. So I think connecting the two terms there, having a diverse set of stakeholders within our governance models is so important if we want to drive innovation, because it enables us to see things from diverse perspectives and different points of view. So I think that was a really valuable comment. Thank you, Mary.
Exactly.
Annamaria, how do you see it?
Now, on that note, I think related to Mary's comment and how you pictured it, I think it's in order to be able to integrate this empathy actually in the process of decision making, one needs to see what's the process to organize relationships, as Stina said in the chat. So I think I don't have anything else to add, and I think this actually grounds our talk quite well. Because in a way, we will be dealing on what was the context that organized a certain type of decision-making in order to produce a certain process, not necessarily new, but valuable in that context. And I think this is a bit the crux of the ULG, because the ULG comes as part of the URBACT method, but more or less, it actually offers a platform for the stakeholders to co-produce and co-design. And when sometimes it's taken out of the project's logic, it loses a bit this context. So I think now we're going to, each of us is going to offer just a short presentation as a food for thought on what were some of our experiences in driving these processes. And please, while we have these presentations, you can leave in the chat questions or reflections or connections to your work, so we can actually have a very interactive debate afterwards. So, and yes, keep leaving some thoughts about governance and innovation, because they're quite related to our talk. So thank you a lot. So I'm going to start just to share a bit the story of almost a public innovation lab in Cluj-Napoca, Romania. It's actually, we dub it the first public innovation lab in Eastern Europe. And that is because we actually, in the last 5 years, we dedicated a lot of energy to capacity building for that, because the concept was too new for the city to adopt in the first place. However, there was some real need for it. So in order a bit to follow my presentation more, I'll maybe share this slide, and I can go very quickly. So very similar to the process where we are in our action planning networks in Cluj, back in 2017, we also had a very good process putting together the bid for the European Capital of Culture, which we didn't won. However, it was a very strong group and a very strong motivation to actually make some changes in the city. But guess what? We needed governance, and we also needed somehow to integrate innovation. This was also in the context where the city was growing, had experienced quite a prosperous decade. And this actually meant a new set of challenges, from housing, a lot of pressure on urban mobility, and so on. Yes, I can set it to full screen. Haha. Yes. Thank you, Severin. Yeah. And actually, all the new set of challenges hinted to the fact that there was a need for a new setup on how to deal with these challenges in terms of culture. So not necessarily, it wasn't a municipality dealing reactively with a lot of what was coming, but actually proactively. And it was quite far away on how the city knew how to do things. So the motivation for change was brought a bit about this context that emerged from a previous project, in our case, the European Capital of Culture. It was also strong leaders, not necessarily the time a strong leader, but in that time, I was very motivated on actually trying a new governance model for the city. And I was lucky enough to find other two strong leaders that we became the co-designers of this project. And there was a real need to test new solutions for growing problems. There was also a sort of political openness, that being said that the mayor, who is still the mayor now, it's in his fourth term, so there was a lot of political stability that was a plus. However, because there wasn't a very clear how the structure could look like and what it could bring, it was more of a let me see what can come out of it, and we will just give it the official mandate, but let's see how this happens. And one important thing, it was risk management, because we as a group actually said that in case it goes well, the municipality can take a lot of the credit for that, but in case it doesn't, then the responsibility is in the set of stakeholders that develop this. The set of stakeholders are actually very similar to our ULG groups, are representative of universities, companies, NGOs, and so on. So this is how the Cluj-Napoca Urban Innovation Unit emerged in 2017, more as a capacity building program for collective actions between different stakeholders. What it sort of did for the last 4 years, it said that it wants to bring a prototype way of working in the municipality on 3 topics that were relevant for the city, that were decided after a participatory process. So in order to bring this prototype, generally there are these 5 stages. So in terms of how it works, we call it WIST. So from wander and explore, the first 2 phases, where you could try from a very big policy challenge to narrow it down to something that can be feasible. And A is activate, it's the pilot project. And S comes from share, which is quite important to actually share not only in terms of results, but also of the learning process. And then T is from trust. And this is not, did trust happen? Did trust emerge? Yes or no? But rather you can see in time what is left from those projects and the continuity. The continuity. So that is actually very important to actually see how each stakeholder learned from the process. I won't go very much in detail because soon we're going to tell you where you're going to find more resources on this and read in depth. Just a little bit to say that on our future of work, from the first year of the Urban Innovation Unit, we co-designed and then won the Urban Innovative Action, which was the first for Romania and Eastern Europe in the third call, which brought a lot of resources, but also a lot of headache, because suddenly for this amount of work, we had a lot of resources. And for the others, meaning urban resilience and urban mobility, we had very scarce resources. So there's also a story there of what happens, because in a way, the unit could actually grow and do amazing things also in terms of capacity building for the entire concept of an emerging public sector innovation lab and on the future of work track. But on the other hand, on the other things that we were trying to pilot, we didn't have so many resources. So this is a sort of a mixed bag. And what was the impact in short? I think it brought, similar to the start of our conversation, it actually brought real reference points at local level of what does an innovation structure mean for Cluj. So it wasn't very much taking a model from somewhere, but actually making it your own, testing it, seeing more, and getting your own language. And when I say language, that also means tools and ways of working around it. It also experimented whether such a structure should be inside the municipality 100% or a mix. And we're still debating that, but probably it's going to look like a hybrid. And it also brought a lot of evidence on what kind of impact does this prototyping, can this prototyping bring. Very similar to what we experimented in our action planning network's journey with the small scale actions. So this is just a little a part of the experience in Cluj, and a bit how to think about maybe a public sector innovation lab that can bring prototype kind of thinking into public administration, but not necessarily from the beginning. Yeah. So thanks a lot, and we'll move to please ask questions, and I'll read everything, and then we'll get a conversation going. But a bit to link about how it is also to gather informal partnerships, and that can actually have a significant change, make a significant change in the city. I would like Eileen to tell us a bit the story of Cork.
Thanks, Annamaria. I really enjoyed that, and I particularly loved the Weast, which I saw Grania also liked in the chat. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so we can see it. So as Annamaria said, I'm going to talk a little bit about the city of Cork, and mostly because it's undergone somewhat of a transformation in recent years. And this year it won a national award for innovation and local governance. So I think it provides a good example of an innovative governance model. And what I hope it shows you is that, you know, it's really achievable to make change. So what was the need? I think this picture really shows what the need was in the city of Cork. There was a declining population in the city, both in terms of residents and in terms of people visiting the city to spend money in shops and businesses. So there was overall stagnation and decline after the kind of in around 2010, 2008, 2010. It was clear to the City Council that their approach to urban revitalisation lagged behind many of its European counterparts. And the City Council was really listening to calls and pleas for help from city centre businesses. the majority of whom were small and medium-sized enterprises, family-owned businesses. On the other hand, there was an increase in popularity in suburban out-of-town shopping centres where people could go, park their car, get everything they wanted in one place. And of course, mostly in those shopping centres, we had, chain stores, multinationals. But in the city centre, as I said, it was full of small and medium-sized enterprises, and they were on their knees. They were really looking for help. And the City Council recognised that, they desperately needed to make change within the city centre to attract people in. So what did they do? Well, in 2014, when a new Chief Executive Officer of the City Council came into place, the first female Chief Executive Officer of the City Council, they commissioned a study which resulted in the city centre strategy in 2014. And the strategy identified measures where the city experience could be enhanced. And ultimately, it made two key recommendations. So the first recommendation it made was that a cross-sectoral partnership should be developed to drive change. And secondly, it recommended that a city centre coordinator be employed to liaise with businesses and broker relationships. So that was one, the city took up those two recommendations. They employed one person to be the face of change for the business, to go out and develop relationships, listen to the businesses, listen to their needs, and bring that message back to the City Council. So it was one person that the businesses got to know and trust. And they also set up a cross-sectoral partnership. In fact, they set up two different groups. The first group they set up was the partnership, and that consisted of local politicians, business representatives, hospitality and cultural staff, public transport representatives, the police, and City Council staff. And they meet every 6 weeks. They also set up the City Centre Steering Group, and I think this group was really key in making things happen and making change. So this City Centre Steering Group consists of senior management from across all the departments in the City Council. So as well as their jobs within their individual departments, they also have a role in revitalising the city centre. They then divided the city centre into 6 character areas, which you can see here on the map. And each member of the management team was responsible for a specific area along with an area planner. As well as this, they develop and review action plans every single year, and they develop progress reports which are revised each year to help realise the aims. So what I'm saying there is every year they look at their action plan, they monitor it closely, and they revise it, and then they work in this structure in order to meet the aims of the action plan. So how did they start in the very beginning? Well, in the very beginning, there was a lot of damaged relationships. There was a lack of trust. And, businesses weren't really sure whether they could trust the City Council, whether they were really going to deliver this time. So the City Council put a lot of effort into building relationships, into building trust, and they started off with what I would say, quick wins, low risk type of actions and achievable actions like this chalk workshop. So this is very cheap and easy to implement. Nobody's going to really complain about it. They tried one, they didn't think there'd be that much interest, but in fact, they were flooded with interest. So they actually had more people in this than the system could register because, of course, parents, they saw something new. There's a chalk workshop. We want to get our kids off screens. Let's bring them into town. So it was hugely successful, very cheap to run. And basically, it helped to bring life into the city. They commissioned things like this piece of street art, which, of course, brought, I suppose, an image to what is existing in the city centre, such as the river and the biodiversity that brings, all these things you can't get in an out-of-town shopping centre, and it also gives a kind of a cultural element to the city. Once businesses saw that, okay, these things are happening, the city is starting to become animated, they started to develop their own initiatives. So here we have yoga on the boardwalk, which took place every Saturday morning and was initiated by a local coffee shop. We had the long table dinner, so we had 12 restaurants who initiated this initiative that fed 400 people right in one of the city's busiest thoroughfares. And this all started to create a bit of excitement, a bit of interest, and mostly it developed trust between the City Council and the businesses. Then that led on to collaborative projects like these urban parklets, which were co-developed between the city and the businesses, and they are now maintained by the community and by the local businesses. And basically, they're very simple elements, again, that any city could do, and just making spaces within the city centre that are attractive and making it a place that people want to come. So the City Council also facilitated collaboration and cross-selling promotion between the cultural sectors, and this really increased take-up and footfall in the city. People were coming in. They also developed this playful cultural trail, which is hugely popular amongst families. And before you know it, you've got a lot more business coming into the city centre. Now, they did reach a stumbling block. So there were no pedestrianised streets really in the city of Cork, and the City Council tried to pilot the pedestrianisation of the main street for 3 hours a day. And they met with absolute mayhem from businesses. They didn't want it at all. It made national news. You know, people were threatening to chain themselves to buildings. They just weren't having it. But the City Council really stuck to their guns on this one. They were committed to making change, and they said, no, you know, we are going to keep this pilot in place even though it was causing war. And how they did that, so they went from meeting, say, every 6 weeks, which is maybe 7 meetings a year. In the summer of 2018, when this pilot was going on, they met 13 times during the summer. So, you know, that was huge commitment by the City Council to get through this problem with their stakeholders. You know, they weren't giving up.
Yes.
I'll speed up.
Yeah.
Sure. So one of the solutions they came to was reimagination messaging. Okay, so instead of having messages that said our street is closed to cars, they put a positive twist on these messages. We now, as a result, since 2018, have 17 permanently pedestrianised streets. Alfresco dining for over 1,000 people. There was a national grant available for winter-proofing our streets. The Cork City Council achieved nearly €1 million in these grants, which was far more than any other city in Ireland. So it just proves that once you've got this group together, you can attract more funding also. And I think in terms of impact, this shows it all. This was the photograph that I showed at the beginning of the presentation. And this is the exact same street here on the right. So you can see the difference. I mean, it really has become, one commentator wonders, is it the Naples of the North? So it's totally transformed. And here in the national conversation, that's very clear. So I suppose the final message is, you know, all of this was possible through the art of partnership. And really, it was their commitment to developing relationships and making sure that they worked that led ultimately to the positive impact. So I really encourage all of you to think about your ULGs in this way and how you can sustain them into the long term for positive change. So thank you. Please add comments or questions in the chat and we can cover them later.
Thanks a lot, Eileen. And also a bit on the art of partnership, but with a bit of a fiscal twist and also a bit of context. In the innovation world, apart from the public sector innovation labs that use various innovation methodologies, there's a lot on business improvement districts or business innovation districts. So a bit to enlighten us on what is behind the concept, Wessel, tell us a bit from your experience. And the famous phrases of 2022, you're on mute. And you're still on mute.
You won't believe it. I first had to stop sharing to get to the mute button. Anyway,
no worries.
Can you hear me? Is it good?
Yeah. Perfect.
So thank you very much, Annamaria, and thanks, Eileen. I also live in Ireland, so I always have to listen to how wonderful Cork is, and I had to go and listen to it again. Thanks, Eileen. It's beautiful, and Cork is a great place. Let me say that. My presentation, I'm trying to do something which is too big, so I'm just going to literally touch on a few things, and I'm going to try and look at what's happening with business-led collaboration, stakeholder collaboration, and in the context of what we're trying to discuss today in eUniversity, how does that feature as a post-planned action implementation structure? And I'm aware that there's probably lots of different ways how it happens for different cities. So I'm aware there's different other models as well. So please put that into the chat box. I'd really appreciate that. So what I want to refer to is these three questions that we're trying to address. The one is, how do we maintain a momentum for collaborative action and innovation that we initiated in our ULGs in the planning process? And what structures can be put in place to continue with the role of the ULG after the end of the project? I'm not assuming that all ULGs can continue as a new structure, but this is just going to be one example that you can consider. And what roles can the organized business community and individual business leaders play in such a structure? So I'm very specifically going to look at, is it something which business community can lead on? So far, as Annamaria has explained, we've looked at public sector-led innovation labs, and the council taking a strong lead in Cork, for instance. But can the business community themselves lead, especially in certain areas or districts? And of course, these questions come out of our URBACT toolkit. And the same questions, these are the questions you always ask when you look at stakeholders, and you ask, how can stakeholders be involved in a planning process? Well, the same question still applies in the implementation phase. And the question is, if you want to involve people, there's this magic question which we say, what's in it for them? And yes, there's some examples in the toolkit that we refer to that you can consider to bring people into an implementation process, stakeholders into an implementation process. So first of all, I just want to look at how the alignment of an area can actually get business people to take a leading role, and then in a practical way, how they actually drive action implementation and measure impact. And as Annamaria was saying, I'm going to specifically use the example of something called business improvement districts, which is actually a technical title, and I'll explain it when we get there. So the alignment of areas and stakeholder needs. If you take certain business districts or commercial areas like a town or city center, but also industrial estates, you would see that there's a need for that area to be managed, and there's usually area strategies or action plans related to a specific area. Eileen gave a very good example of the city of Cork, and specifically the city center of Cork, how people came together as stakeholders and thought about how they can kind of impact working together. In other words, the governance model there was one of a partnership of various stakeholders who all have an interest in the city center. The same applies to other commercial and industrial districts. So for instance, there's a lot of industrial estates that you have which are in a period of change where the single use that used to be in the industrial estate is, say for instance, was large factories and so on, have become redundant. And there's the question, what could be other uses for such an industrial estate? And usually in the case of business and commercial districts, the external demands, what happens in the marketplace internationally, has a huge influence. And then also, not to forget the internal challenges, the social and the cultural needs of the neighborhoods, of the places where these districts are located. So if we look at some of the leadership issues that comes up. So typically local business leaders find themselves in a situation where for them to grow the business or to expand, get more talent in, to be able to increase whatever their business product is, they need the area to improve, and they need a better collaboration and approach with other key players, for instance, a local authority. And so this interdependency between business and local authority becomes core to structure and how this leadership can be facilitated in structure. So that's the rationale often for something called a business improvement district or business innovation district. And again, similar to a ULG, a forum is typically created where there's regular interaction between the key players. And if you look at the delivery of actions, Some of those actions, sometimes when you say the word business, everybody thinks it's going to be some kind of expensive action. But ironically, similar to what Eileen was referring to, it all starts with the smaller actions where people can collaborate and work together. That photograph was taken last week at this one business district where the local community, together with the business leaders, actually created a pocket forest of 500 new trees that have been planted. So, but
I was thinking maybe to wrap it up in 1 minute and maybe to offer some of the examples of the business improvement districts around
I'm going
Europe.
there now. Very good. Okay. So the example that I specifically just want to show you is in Saniford, where I had some privilege to work with the Saniford Business District. A business improvement district is, through legislation, is implemented, and it becomes a 5-year area a specific area that can have a governance structure which is funded by business levies, by the businesses in that area, and they have an agreement with the council where they can take certain actions and have the authority to take certain actions. And it's always about improving of the area. And what I can tell you in the case of Saniford, initially, Saniford it's a district where a lot of multinational companies, for instance, Microsoft, have their head office and so on. And they needed to make it more livable. And so the same issues you would find in a city center can be dealt with in an industrial, what was an industrial estate and now a business district. And it's the same processes, but this time around it's led by businesses. So that's all possible through structures like business innovation districts or business improvement districts. So I'm not going to go through the detail of that. I just want to say there's some other examples that's very useful. The one in Barcelona, Pablo is very useful, as well as the Zuidas in Amsterdam, which is the same thing of how other stakeholders, such as businesses, such as universities, play a key role in creating a livability area in our cities. So I'm going to end there, and I'm going to allow you to ask questions. There's lots of sources that we put in the document. But as I said, I can only touch on little bits, and people are very welcome to ask questions. I haven't seen what's in the chat yet. That's me, Annamaria.
We're getting some very nice examples from Lisbon in the chat.
Yeah, there we go.
And indeed, it's really nice to see how Lisbon is really focusing on culture and creative industries more and more, also with more resources. Thank you very much, Wessel and Eileen. As Chris mentioned in the chat, yeah, exactly. Thank you very much. We compiled this handout because we know that the fireside chat is very short, and this talk is just an appetizer on how to think in your own networks, and also maybe to curate some of the conversation on what's ahead. So in the handout, you're going to find a lot of actually in English resources on the models that we presented, also with more details on the impact of actions and results that you can expect from building such structures, but also some guides, some studies that have already been published on business improvement districts and what do they do, on public sector innovation labs and how different they are depending on the method that they use, from prototyping, from data, from behavior insights, from human-centered design, and so on. What is important a bit to navigate, I think we tried our best to say why these things should be useful and what should be an entry point in some of this conversation. And we find that, of course, not every process is the same, but some of the processes in ULG actually create a lot of spark and a lot of motivation and creativity, and it's important to use that momentum. So maybe in order a bit to understand how to best use our conversation here, I'm going to address this question to Eileen and Wessel. Why do you think these models are relevant, and how should cities make use of them in their ULG work?
I'm going to go first. From the business perspective, my job I worked in the council as the person that had to be the contact person with businesses. And I heard their frustration. And the business community sometimes want to move quite quickly. And then if they expect the council to move with things, they find that's quite frustrating. But there's also a responsibility for business community and taking up responsibility and giving them the chance to take up responsibility. And the whole ethos of what we have at URBACT is the stakeholder collaboration, the sharing of responsibility, and the ability to get a synergy from shared action or people bringing their resources to the table, if I could put it that way. And I found that with the Business Improvement District, that's exactly what happened. It also meant that the municipality had to change its way, because there are certain areas where they had a yes or no attitude, which now had to become a little more gray and a little more taking in consideration of what happens, what the perspectives are from other stakeholders. Eileen, you mentioned that also with for instance, the changing of pedestrianized streeting and so on. Maybe I'll just sage to you, and you have to say.
Yeah, thank you, Wessel. I completely agree. One thing I particularly liked what you said was that the business improvement districts allowed the businesses to come to an agreement with the council that they could have authority to do certain actions. And that's really empowering. And even though the bid is a formal structure, I suppose the Cork example is very informal. It's just a partnership. There's not, apart from the action plan, there isn't any written agreement. But if you look at the example of yoga on the boardwalk, the business never sought permission from the city council to do that. And the city council were absolutely delighted that they didn't, because but that wouldn't have happened before they started working together, because that relationship, that trust just simply wasn't there. So what I'd say to ULGs, I suppose, or to ULG coordinators is start to think now about how your ULG can be sustained into the future. Who do you need around the table? How often are you going to meet? What structure are you going to put in place to make sure that things get done? In Cork, for example, they meet every 6 weeks. They report on progress at each council meeting. So they can't get away with doing nothing. They have to answer to their stakeholders. They have to answer to their public representatives. And you kind of need something like that to make sure things get done. And importantly, do you have strong leaders, and do you have people with a mandate to get things done? Because very often, you can have lots of people who have a vision and really want to achieve things around the table. But if you don't have people with a mandate or the ability to get things done, then that's not going to work. So you've started your work now. You've started to get your stakeholder group together in your ULG. Whatever you do, don't let it go. Build on that. Now it's a fantastic opportunity, whatever shape you want to put on it.
And just to follow on to that, in the case of the formal structures that I've referred to, that formalizes in the form of a company. So if a formal company is formed, and that brings in the whole accountability that company law requires. So it doesn't stop us from just being informal as an informal grouping. We can go to the level of forming new companies, and it's quite okay for that to be a public sector company or a public open public company.
Yeah.
I think, Annamaria, I'm going to give back to you. I think you're enjoying these questions. We're going to throw it back at you. You're welcome to go with the next question.
No, it's really nice too. I mean, given the fact that we have such complementary backgrounds, it's really nice to hear different perspectives. I was thinking, actually, in the tourism-friendly cities where I'm lead expert for, I was in Krakow. They actually had a tourism forum, which became the ULG. But of course, they brought more stakeholders, because the tourism forum was generally for businesses. So, but by doing so, and by being active and also very relevant in terms of the topics discussed, it's now becoming very clear how the ULG work is going to continue, because that's a live body that really is needed for the city. And on some of the questions that we have here from Judith, if such examples are also concerning from a big municipality and a series of other municipalities, I think all of them can apply. But of course, one needs to understand what could be gained by everybody. And that language, sometimes it's a language of business, sometimes it's a language of impact, sometimes it's a language of a political deal. But I think there's no real recipe from where to start. All these models, be them informal or formalized, one, they need somehow either a very clear leadership that is going to be also accountable and take up the risks, or as in the best case scenario, where there would be a high level of trust of everybody, and it would be clear that cooperation is the only way. However, that does not happen often. And I can also say that working in an environment with very low trust in public institution and cooperation, this was a very big challenge, and also it was a very big achievement that we managed to build a structure. But this is why I think we only managed to build a capacity for the structure, not the structure from the beginning.
I just want to, Annamaria, there's some excellent questions that we might have to respond to. I'm looking here at the question from Mary from Greece, where she says one of the biggest problems in Greece is that people hesitate to participate in ULGs. And she suggests that as a level of organization, there should be special departments working alone with citizens. Now, that citizen liaison function, I think in a local authority, I've seen that being put in place. I would, however, respond that the whole idea of the structure that implements actions and becomes a structure with its own dynamic should, in my experience, be de-linked as much as possible from being a municipality department or function. And I just want to leave that with people. The more we can create the justification for the structure to continue in its own right, rather than being dependent on, say, a person working in the municipality, I think that's quite important to think about that and focus on that. I don't know if you've picked up another question. I just going.
No, it's true. And I think in some cases where there's not a lot of culture of participation, actually, it does make sense to have sometimes also formalized structure or a department, because in a lot of the innovation and a lot of the startups, one of the most important roles is actually the community manager. Well, the community manager is actually the what in public administration we would call citizen responsible with citizen engagement. I fully agree with your point, Wessel, that this is not a one person or a one department responsibility, and that's actually one of the big risks with innovation and with innovation labs, because one of the big critiques is that because you have such a lab or such a department, then only they are responsible and the rest of the institution stays the same. And it's quite dangerous to silo, in a way, innovation like that. On talking about with chief innovation officers from around the world, it comes down, unfortunately, to a very personal game on how one understands its mission and uses their capacities to bridge this, because otherwise institutions, as we all know, are afraid of change, and it's quite natural. We were discussing in the previous e-university on the fact that also a lot of our URBACT projects actually mean a lot of change in the status quo, and that's because it's our human nature just not to like so many changes and just to offer resistance. This is why it gets difficult. So yeah, I think it's very important for a public administration, as you, Mary, are asking and speaking from experience. I think it's worthwhile to try for 3 years how it works with an engagement officer, to try also to see if the municipality can support in any way building capacity for emerging leaders, or just having, as Eileen was pointing out, who actually has their ears open to hear if somebody wants to propose something. Because I think this is what happened in the story of Cork. Not only that there was a very clear mandate, but there was also quite a clear door opened to say we want to find some solutions on the challenges we have. So as the integrated action plans now start to become more clear, I think it's very important to, at city level and at ULG level, to say, we have now a plan in place. This is what we need, the how, what Jan was referencing this morning. So we're making a transition from the what to the how. And this is how we would like a bit to put short milestones for the first year, for the second year, and who is there to listen.
Annamaria, maybe for Eileen, there's a great question here from Alvaro. One thing is to create consensus, another is to implement concrete projects in an engaged, participatory way. Could you comment? Eileen, this one's right up your...
Thank you, Wessel. You're right, Alvaro. I mean, in some ways, you almost think, oh, making the consensus and creating the vision, maybe that's the easy part. But actually implementing concrete partnership or projects in partnership is the more challenging part. An example from Cork would probably be those parklets. So the parklets were created by the City Council putting out an open call to citizens and businesses who were interested in maintaining them, in developing them, and managing them over a longer period of time. And they actually received an awful lot of input. So I think these open calls are a very good way of making sure that you're providing the opportunity for people to get involved if they want to, that they feel welcome, that they feel they can participate, rather than being far removed and it being kind of a closed fortress, if you like. But yes, as you can see, Cork has also been very successful in other projects like winterproofing their streets. And again, it's about waiting for the right time to find funding that you can access together as a group in order to achieve these projects. I hope that gives you some answer to that question, but please feel free to further comment.
We're getting a very nice also context and example from Mirna on how difficult participatory placemaking processes are. And we can have a bunch of these examples, and they are very useful. And I think this is why you see how important it is to actually have a sort of governance set, because afterwards, all these examples, either coming from an urban planning lens or from a citizen lens or from a urban services lens, just feed into that. But this is why I think it's very important to actually think about coming back to our our opening discussion. What is that glue that can actually stabilize this form of empathy search and relationship building? And I think this is why sometimes it's important to say, look, the governance of the ULG is going to look like this. Of course, you can call it a pilot, you can call it an innovative pilot, because we saw that innovation just marks something new. But it's quite important to give it a governance structure from the beginning, so it's more clear what feeds into what. Let's see. Yes, we have indeed from La Rochelle. I think it's a super nice example of cooperation.
I also think Christian has very, very cleverly shown that there's, of course, already a great article on the URBACT website, where some small-scale actions is all about this experimentation with how do we get local solutions going that's beyond just who in which silo is doing what. So just to give a plug for the URBACT website, the great URBACT website.
And slowly but surely we have to end, because we know it has been a long day. Yes, please rate our session. Let us know what happened here. It was really nice to, for us, it was a privilege to talk. We wish we would have seen you more, but thank you so much for being active on chat. And it would be very nice to tell us if the handout proves useful now or in the future. So hopefully we can get a debrief on that at the festival, if not earlier. And thank you a lot for joining.
Thank
So
you.
wishing you a nice afternoon and the rest of the e-university, and we look forward to learning together more.
Thanks, everyone.
A lot. Bye.
Take care.